morning, good afternoon, or good evening from where you are. It's a pleasure to welcome you to our monthly webinar, RC07, Women in Politics in the Global South. We're very delighted today to introduce our great speaker, Dr. Jean Encinas, who is currently professor at the Department of Political Science, College of Social Sciences and Philosophy at the University of the Philippines, who will present a very interesting, timely topic on resisting militarist response to crisis, populism, ontological security, and Filipino migrant nurses under the Duterte. I hope I pronounced it. Okay. The speaker, of course, Dr. Sorry. Dr. Jean Encinas, before joining the University of the Philippines, she worked for 15 years at the Senate of the Philippines, where she was the director of the Senate Economic Planning Offices. Her work explores the politics of labor out migration in the Philippines from a gender perspective. She also writes about gender and women's political presentations, and her research has been published in several peer-reviewed local and international journals. Dr. Encinas has also written reports, notably for the UNDP, UN Women, the World Bank, and other international organizations. And for her experience in bridging research and policy, she was awarded honorable mention as a Global South Feminist Scholar by the International Studies Association Feminist. Congratulations. Theory and Gender Studies section in 2022. Currently, she is a convener of Every Woman. It's a network of feminists who advances women's rights in politics and governance in the Philippines. So before I give the floor to Dr. Jean Encinas, I would like to give you like a brief summary of who we are and what is the purpose of RC07, which is a committee of the International Political Science Association. So our group or committee was recognized as a group back in 1988. That was granted research committee status in 1992 and changed its name from Women and Politics in Developing Nations to Women and Politics in the Global South in December 2015. So our focus ranges from different topics. It focuses on the process of development, issues of gender inequality, political regimes, the interplay of micro-political processes, representation, decision-making, the allocation of resources, democratization, and removal of inequitous relationship at all levels. Our committee has to date paid also particular attention to the issues of women, depths, and structural adjustments, women and the environment, women in the democratization process, and structural adjustment, notably the impact on women, ethnic conflict, and women's human rights. We are currently undertaking special studies, notably on women's leadership in economic institutions and other related topics. And we also welcome any pitches or those women or any experts, be they men or women experts in the on the gender issues from different parts of the world. If you're interested, please send us your pitch. We'd love to present either your report, your study, or your like a paper that you are working on that you would like to share from different parts of the world, and just send it over. We hold our webinar every Wednesday of the month. Every third Wednesday of the month, and we welcome any pitch from you or from anyone who has an expert in one of these fields. So without further ado, give the floor to Dr. Jean Encinas for her timely and very interesting topic. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Hello, good evening from Manila. Thank you, Yasmin. Thank you, Swarna, and thank you to those who are here. Before I start, trigger warning, you will be seeing a lot of pictures of Rodrigo Duterte. But the title of my presentation is Resisting. Do you have? Do you see my presentation already?
We
Yeah.
do. Yes, we
Okay.
do. Right.
Thank
Yes.
you. The title of my presentation is Resisting Militarist Response to Crisis, Populism, Ontological Security, and Filipino Migrant Nurses under Duterte. In April 2020, then President Rodrigo Duterte imposed a total deployment ban on medical health professionals seeking to work abroad. The reason was that there were fears that the health system uh, of the Philippines will collapse due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Here is the timeline of the ban. In April 2020, Rodrigo Duterte initially imposed a total ban, which suspended the immigration for work of doctors, nurses, and other medical health professionals. However, a great majority of these medical health professionals were nurses. As you know, the Philippines is one of the world's largest exporters of nurses. On April 13 to 14, 2020, there was partial exemption on the ban due to the backlash. So Rodrigo Duterte allowed those with approved overseas employment contracts to leave the country, those who have employment contracts as of March 8, 2020. On August 14, there was reiteration of the ban. It was even clarified by the labor secretary at that time. The ban was only for those new applicants, meaning to say they don't have contracts yet. On September 21, the ban was sort of expanded, meaning there were exemptions to the ban. Those who were exempted were workers with complete travel documents as of August 31. Yeah, no? But on November 21, there was lifting of the ban, no? As announced by the Labor Secretary. Uh, this was already due to the backlash that the government was receiving at that time. On November 20, an annual cap was already introduced, meaning to say the ban was lifted, but an annual cap initially allowing only 5,000 healthcare workers to leave per year to ensure that there's sufficient medical workforce that will remain in the country. Eventually, in December 2021, an annual 7,000 medical health workers who can leave the country became the cap. Until now, it is the one that's being um, implemented by the government. My research puzzle is this. On the one hand, scholarship on populist crisis governance suggests that crisis governance, especially those um, implemented by populist leaders, is gendered.
Mm.
Furthermore, Rodrigo Duterte's pandemic response is militarized and securitized. That's how the scholarship of these two strands of literature I'm looking at have been argued. On the other hand, migrant nurses have been portrayed in the literature as vulnerable due to structural conditions such as high cost of living and working conditions in migrant destination countries. However, my puzzle is that the expectation is that migrant nurses are vulnerable. Therefore, it's safe to assume that they're passive and are lacking in collective agency. But this case study that I'm looking at suggests that the 2020 nurse deployment ban by Duterte was resisted and succeeded in reconfiguring the policy and the Duterte narrative. So, my research question poses, how can feminized others disrupt gendered and militarist response to crisis? More specifically, I ask, what narratives of resistance did migrant Filipino nurses employ to protest the deployment ban imposed on them due to the pandemic? So the objective is to examine the response to Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte's initial ban on Filipino migrant health professionals, particularly nurses, from working abroad from 2020 to 2021 at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. I actually contribute to the literature um, within the intersection of feminist international relations and international migration by building on the concepts of Delahanty and Steele's called Ontological, Insecurity, and the State's autobiographical narrative. My paper shows that populist responses to ontological insecurity are gendered, drawing on understandings of states as dominant masculine actors, subordinating their inferior feminine others. More significantly, I demonstrate in this paper that such responses can be challenged and resisted, and thereby expanding our understandings of ontological security from the perspective of the feminized others, which is actually the gap in the literature. I show specifically that in this paper that feminist international relations and international migration scholarship can actually talk to each other, and that there's significant gap, no, in understanding the sort of the links between feminist international relations and international migration. But through this paper, I try to sort of contribute to this gap, to address this gap. My conceptual framework draw on the concept of ontological security that was conceptualized by Delahanty and Steele, who argue that in moments of ontological insecurity, such as, for instance, the COVID-19 crisis, the state normally loses its sense of identity because economic crisis, pandemics normally destabilizes the state's narrative of control. So therefore, the state tries to restore it by deploying continuity narratives, such as, for instance, the control of sovereignty and stability in the country. But Delahanty and Steele, though they mentioned feminized others, they say that normally, in regaining control of the narrative that was destabilized by ontological insecurity crisis, states normally tend to others the feminine to other the feminized sectors of society, such as, for instance, women. So, in articulating my conceptual framework, I look at COVID-19 as an ontological insecurity situation that brought about a crisis on the part of the state because it can potentially result in the collapse of the health system. It was in fact an existential threat, and it also um, sort of disrupts the identity of the Philippines as a global exporter of nurses. And one of the sources of the state's insecurity would be that it will lose control of its sovereignty because at that time, the global competition for nurses, specifically coming from the Philippines, got very intense, no? Due to the pandemic requirements. So my argument is that the migration ban is aimed at bringing back ontological security by invoking the state's autobiographical narrative. And I argue that for this paper, the nurses who resisted were the feminized others. Duterte has also been conceptualized or has been argued as a populist in many of the literature on Rodrigo Duterte. And in fact, during the Independence Day celebration in the year of the COVID-19 in 2020, he articulated that um, our nurses or our healthcare professionals are the so-called modern day heroes, the frontliners, no, in sort of their jobs as the ones who are fighting against the COVID-19 pandemic. Why did I specifically select this quote? Mainly because, as you can see, Duterte as a populist was sort of elevating the status of health professionals by elevating them as modern day heroes and frontliners. But then it also means that he is sort of hailing them into the fold of the state as frontliners. He actually depicted COVID as war. Feminist understandings of COVID as war uh, do not necessarily agree that COVID-19 or pandemics should be conceptualized as wars because it would, for instance, warrant or normalize masculinized responses to pandemics, no? If you conceptualize it as wars. So as I discussed initially, the onslaught of COVID-19 was the reason why Duterte ordered a total ban of health professionals to work abroad. So, in my paper, I would like to provide an understanding of the narratives of resistance that the nurses, no, particularly nurses, and the conditions that enabled them to succeed. While conventional accounts of nurse migration emphasize the push and pull determinants of their mobility, job satisfaction, and working conditions, a political account of their mobility or immobility has yet to be unpacked, particularly drawing from feminist international relations. So, my paper employed interviews with nurses. There's a group of nurses who call themselves prison nurses. I also interviewed nurse activists, health policy experts, members of the Philippine Nursing Association, members of the Filipino Nurses United, those who worked to resist the ban. I also looked at policy issuances of the government during the pandemic, government reports, official issuances, and media reports to sort of triangulate what I found out in the interview. As some of you may know, Filipino nurse migration is a product of U.S. colonial legacy. Long before the dictator Ferdinand Marcos Sr. Launched its labor export program in 1974, nurse migration to the United States uh, were nurse migration to the United States already happened in the um, 1940s and the 1960s when there was a lot of medical health professional shortages during these periods in the United States. But it was not until 1974 that the Philippines embarked on a state-sponsored overseas employment policy. As a result of this um, labor export policy or overseas employment policy, Um, in 2022, the Philippine Professional Regulation Commission already indicated that there's nearly 1 million registered nurses in the country, uh, of which more than 500,000 are active and more than 300,000 have already uh, um, I'm sorry, out of the almost 1 million registered nurses, one third have already left the Philippines to work overseas. Um, why is this important? Mainly because I argue that this is also not just a result of individual, aspirations, but also the relentless, um, what do you call this, encouragement of the Philippine state to encourage families to take on nursing degrees because of the promise that they will earn lots of money when they work abroad. Throughout the years, no, there has been what is called the nursing boom in the country, no? And in fact, the Philippines has been producing an annual, what do you call this, production or um, we have been producing more than 100,000 registered nurses annually. So we have lots, but a significant percentage of them are actually not in the medical field, no? And that was why when Duterte said during the pandemic that there was a shortage of nurses, that was not necessarily true. There was a shortage of nurses who are um, not in the medical profession, mainly because of the low salary and dismal working conditions of these nurses. That's why they would rather go to uh, other industries that have nothing to do with the medical field, if they cannot yet go abroad to work. As you know, I mean, as I've said earlier, the response of Duterte to the COVID-19 pandemic was also argued to be militarist, no, and consistent with his populist tendencies. Um, One manifestation, for instance, of this, what do you call this? Um, Militarist response would be, for example, in his language, at the height of the pandemic, he said to medical health professionals that it would be an honor for you to die for your country. I assure you. So, this is something that he has normalized. Yeah, as I've said, the context of the ban was that was a medical and nurse professional shortage in the country. That was what they said. And one indicator also of why the COVID-19 response of Duterte is considered as militarized was because he sort of established a committee, a high level committee that he used to respond to the pandemic. But the leaders, the officials of this committee was primarily uh, comprising of military personnel, other retired or active military officials and generals. We also have one of the longest lockdowns in the world during that time. Um, I also argue, no, consistent with those who studied the gender dimension of ontological security, that the ban on nurses is also a form of gendered nationalism in which nurses are called to serve the nation first, before their own personal interests, invoking their patriotic duty and sacrifice. And indeed, that was what Duterte was telling the nurses, no? I draw this term from Peterson, who referred to gendered nationalism as those state projects that reify women's traditional roles as childbearers and nurturers, and invoking such roles as markers of belonging and identity. The results of the interviews, I um I did not anymore write quotes from the interviews, but what I do have now are some of the um, media quotes that I got, which helped me triangulate also the results of the interviews. But these are the themes, no, that I got from the interview. One is that nurses and even activists were pointing out that the reason why nurses resisted the ban and was because of the local working conditions. They did not like to stay in the Philippines. They said that the government did not give us reason to stay. We will not be sacrificed, no, in this project of Duterte. Even if Duterte and the entire administration was telling them at the time to stay, no. Yeah, so that was also what the nurses emphatically told me during my interviews. Most of the nurses that I interviewed, it's either they got offloaded, they were already on the plane, but they got offloaded because of the ban. They were not allowed to leave. The others, you know, already got all their papers, but in April 2020, when there was a total ban, they just, you know, gave up on their contracts, but they just had to talk to their employers abroad in the UK and in other parts of Europe. The other theme that came out in the interviews, and which also came out in the media quotes that I got, is that, you know, nurses were saying that Duterte said that we have to protect the country, but the nurses said our primary obligation was to our family. We signed up for our contracts not primarily because we want uh, to, what do you call this, send remittances to our country, but to help our family. So they said that, you know, in essence, they're reframing care as familial rather than a national obligation. And that was their primary goal in going abroad. So that was what they told me when they said that, you know, we did not sign up for this. So we are rejecting the ban. We are resisting the ban because our family, the quality of life of our family will not be better if we stay here in the Philippines. My family had already invested a lot, no, in sending me to school. Nursing degree in the Philippines is um, not necessarily for poor families because it requires, you know, a substantial investment to be able to um, finish a nursing degree. The third result of the interview is that this was really very telling, is that they consider the fact that it's safer for them to be abroad compared to when they are here in the Philippines. Why are they saying this? Because at that time, the Duterte administration was really slow in providing PPEs, personal protective equipment for medical health professionals. Whereas the nurses told me that they have insurances, no, in the migrant destination countries. The pay is much, much bigger compared to the Philippines, and that they were guaranteed with equipment they were guaranteed with PPEs, um, modern equipment to protect themselves from um, the pandemic, the COVID-19 virus. So, in essence, what this tells us is that the nurses, in invoking that they are safer abroad, the nurses sort of disrupted the protective masculinity being offered by Duterte. No? They also disrupted the control, no, the sense of control that Duterte was invoking on these migrant nurses. So if these were the sort of the substantive narratives that were told to me by these nurses, um, it's also um, important to note that these narratives were conveyed via the coalition building that was built, no, around this time. Remember that we were on lockdown, so what they utilized social media. The prison nurses had Facebook and Twitter. It was then Twitter. It was called Twitter then. They named their social media handles as prison nurses to emphasize the fact that they were trapped. And these prison nurses' social media handle actually got the attention of the Filipino Nurses United and even the Philippine Nurses Association. It also got the attention of politicians and some cabinet members, mainly because these prison nurses were already being interviewed on radio, on traditional media, on podcasts, and also on television. No? So they were already narrating their plight. Some even cried just to convey the fact that they will not accede to the ban. They do not agree that they should be covered by the ban. So this helped a lot, no? This helped a lot in terms of trying to convey this message to the entire Philippines. And slowly they gained allies from some politicians and some cabinet members. As soon as restrictions were eased, some of them also were able to hold face-to-face protests. No? So in essence, the coalition building coupled with the narratives they had demonstrated that the government did not have the monopoly of the narrative. The coalition also amplified the nurses' demands in so many ways, no? In the government, in the media, and um, in the public. So what happened was that there were adjustments to the total ban, as you saw earlier in the timeline. Little by little, there were adjustments to ease the backlash. The Philippine Overseas Employment Administration, which is now already called the Department of Migrant Workers, established caps, and there were subsequent amendments. As of December 21, uh, the government has a cap of 7,000 deployed healthcare workers, meaning to say every year, only 7,000 healthcare workers will be allowed to leave the country. So, in a way, the policy reversals tell us that the ban was unsustainable because it relied on feminized labor and their sacrifice. The nurses, however, refused that position. The state, you know, um, could not anymore convincingly sustain its protective claim, its gendered narrative, its masculinized narrative. So, in the end, the political costs increased, mainly because the the nurses' narratives, the three narratives that I explained earlier, revealed the contradictions, no, in the state's narratives in banning healthcare workers. So my conclusion is that populist response to ontological insecurity during crisis can in fact be challenged, no, as demonstrated uh, in this paper. This can be done via narratives that expose the response contradictions. So, in a way, I argue that further research can be done in other contexts in which populist governments deployed masculinized narratives. For example, in natalist regimes where women are enjoined to give births to change the country's aging demographics can also be an example of feminized others being used by the governments to solve their existential crisis, which is the fact that, their population is shrinking. Though their governments may not necessarily be called populist governments, at the very least, it also tells us that when ontological security is threatened, states, no, whether populists or not, can, you know, um, use women to actually stabilize control of their narrative. So that's it. I'd be very happy to engage with you and listen to your comments and questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jean Encina-Franco, for this very rich presentation. And I particularly appreciated how you brought together the concepts of, of populism and ontological security. I just learned about that term with you today. So thank you so much to examine, resistance to militarized crisis responses and your focus on Filipino nurses under Duterte offered like a very compelling and grounding case that, that highlighted the human implication of broader political dynamics. So as maybe as as you draw on the concept of ontological security to frame your argument, could you elaborate? And I want to understand more on how this concept helps us understand not just vulnerability, but also, agency among healthcare workers in such politicized context. So that is my question. And again, congratulations for this very, very, timely and rich presentation. And then after that, I'm going to give the floor to the audience if they have any questions or comments or feedback or additions to your great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin. That's an important question. Actually, ontological security has not been used in terms of migration. There's one study that looks at ontological insecurity also of nurses, but that's not using ontological security of the state. In IR, ontological security was mainly used in military security topics, but not on human security such as migration. Um, in articulating ontological insecurity and how migrant nurses responded, I show that um, in moments of crisis, the state, no, had to have something to cling on, no, to sort of regain its, grasp on its masculinity narratives, um, in terms of, their control, their over their sovereignty status. And at that time, the Duterte administration was trying to sort of stem the tide um, of the outflow of nurses, because a lot of governments were already relaxing their visa restrictions. They were expediting, no, the emigration of migrant nurses despite the pandemic. And Duterte framed that there's a crisis, there's a shortage, when in fact, the crisis has been there all the time, even before COVID, because the nurses, local nurses in the Philippines were suffering for such a long time. They get meager pay, they work very long hours, they have to pay for their internship, and that is why they cannot, afford to be employed locally if they want to recoup their family's investments. So we are in effect training nurses to work for other countries. During before COVID-19, I mean that's already happening. But during COVID-19, the government seemed to fear that our already dismal healthcare system will actually collapse, no? And the best way to do that, to sort of performatively say that I care about Filipinos, is to control the bodies of these migrant nurses. And you know, I I um, I really admire these nurses, mainly because it was very difficult to launch resistance at that time because of the lockdown, because of the pandemic, but they really uh, got the attention of the government. In fact, this is not scientific, but if you look at the discourses on X, on Facebook at that time, some members of the Filipino public are divided over to over that ban. No, some were saying that they have the right to leave, but others were saying, no, can you just stay to help us, in the meantime? But eventually, it also, as I've said, no, it also sort of unraveled the contradictions in this deployment ban, because it sort of exposed the real crisis, which was, the dismal working conditions of nurses. No, the nurses were saying, "How can we stay? How can you even tell us to stay when, in fact, look at what's happening to to our local nurses?" And I guess, I am not discounting the fact that, migration in general is very close to the Filipino psyche, because 10 to 12% of our population are abroad. Every Filipino family has a relative working abroad, or a permanent resident, or a citizen, no, abroad. But it also tells you that in instances when push comes to shove, um, deployment bans can be what do you call this, can be resisted, because legally our constitution says that every Filipino has the right to travel. That's one. In terms of controlling women's mobility, we are a signatory to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. And in fact, it was one of our diplomats who wrote CEDAW General Recommendation 26, which specifically outlines the rights of women migrant workers. So it goes against legal norms, no? the legal framework which we understand. So
Thank
I
you.
mean, they have all the right. I mean, their narratives were really quite powerful, and they also the coalition building was also successful such that they were able to tap into important people.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this very convincing answer. I'll give the floor to any comments, questions, feedback. Please, you're welcome to join the discussion.
There's
Please.
one in the chat.
Yes.
There's one in the chat, Yasmin.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. My question is from Shutosh Ranjan. My question is, can populism be seen as a political tool that symbolically empowers migrant workers while materially marginalizing them? Can populism be seen as a political tool that symbolically empowers migrant workers while materially marginalizing them?
Yes, indeed, no, as I've shown in this paper, on the one hand, they are being elevated as modern day heroes. On the other hand, they're being deprived of their right to work. But whether, in the case of the Philippines, whether the leader is a populist or not, um, the the government has been, you know, expressing its mantra of um, gender sensitive migration policies or protecting the rights of migrant workers, particularly because our migrant workers are in care work. Either they are domestic workers in the low wage category of migrant workers, or either in as nurses, as professionals, no? So, so that's the case. They're heroes, but their um exodus or emigration are constantly being monitored by the government. That's especially the case for domestic workers. They have trainings, they have long pre-departure orientation seminars. So the government is really trying very hard to position itself as a quote unquote protector of migrants' rights. And so as they will not be depicted as a labor exporter. But Duterte is different because Duterte knows how to speak to migrant workers in the way that previous presidents were not, no? He spoke to them in, I mean, just like, no, just like how he spoke to the rest of the nation, he spoke to them in non-technical language because other presidents, all of them, no, valorized migrants. But other presidents would talk to migrants in terms of um, their contribution to remittances, their heroes to their family. So that's very common. But for Duterte, he would be very specific as to their concerns. Like he will say that you do not have to line up just to get passports. You do not have to go from one government agency to another government agency just to process your documents. And that's precisely why before he ended his term, he um, established the Department of Migrant Workers. And that is also the reason why, uh, even as Duterte is already in The Hague, in the ICC detention facility, as you can probably see in the news, lots of migrant workers really love him. So yeah, that's just my sense of why they like Duterte. He spoke to them very differently compared to past presidents.
Thank you. Anyone? Yes, we have Jumar. Please go ahead.
Hello. Can someone confirm if I'm audible?
Yes, yes, Jomar, we can hear
Uh,
you.
Such a pleasure hearing from you again, ma'am. I'm Jomer from University of the Philippines, Cebu, Political Science and Public Affairs
Oh,
program.
oh.
Uh, yeah, so maybe beyond interpreting the deployment ban and state response through populist rhetoric and masculinized narrative of control, could this also be reframed as a broader structural policy problem in the Philippines as a labor exporting state? For instance, when we look at mechanisms like return service obligations and government scholarships, for example, our Department of Science and Technology scholarship has a return service agreement. Even the University of the Philippines, Manila,
Mhm.
health programs have, I think, 5 years return service agreement also after graduation. So how might the state more effectively probably design better policies that both respect the autonomy of Filipino medical workers and address the domestic shortage, especially given the persistent pool of lucrative opportunities abroad, as you've mentioned.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. In fact, um, the what do you call this? The service requirement has been there, I think, even during the Marcos senior years, no? But right now it's only for those um who acquire their nursing degree and medical degrees, I think, from state universities. And I think there's a 2 year, no, 2 year requirement. I guess that's one way to also sort of uh, stem the tide of the so-called brain drain, because that's also one criticism of the labor export program of the government. So again, that's both on discursive terrain, meaning to say they want to be seen as they want to demonstrate rhetoric, express rhetoric that would say that hey, we still care, we're not just labor exporters. But it also um, um, it's also one way to ensure that, of course, some will remain, especially because the government also had to spend for those who were already in who acquired their degrees in state universities. So that's actually the case. But right now, under the Marcos Jr. administration, the policy is to put up more nursing schools, to put up more nursing graduates. So that there will be no nursing shortage. But they're missing the point. The reason why there's shortage was because nobody wants to go into the medical profession anymore because uh, they cannot earn a lot, no, if they go, especially in private hospitals. So I hope I answered your comment, Jomar.
Thank you. Any anyone from the audience? Yes, Jidward, Bernardo, please.
Good evening, everyone. From the Philippines, I am actually Dr. Jean Encinas-Franco's student, PhD Political Science at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. Actually, this is not a question. This is only an appreciation or reaction based on the discussion or lecture of Dr. Franco. The presentation really struck me specifically. It's really compelling with regards to the intersection between the populist politics, the ontological security, and also the lived experiences of Filipino migrant nurses, particularly during the administration of the former president of the Philippines, which is Rodrigo Duterte. I found it really interesting is that how it shifts the analysis from purely economic migration, like the labor demand, towards a more psychological and identity-based framework. If we're going to look at an analytical perspective which invokes the ontological security, it really implies that the migrant nurses are not only navigating the material precarity, but also deeper anxieties about the identity, the belongingness, and the continuity of self. So, under a populist regime like Duterte, which is often mobilizes nationalistic rhetoric while simultaneously depending on overseas labor, there seems to be a contradiction where the state celebrates migrant workers as heroes, yet they may also produce insecurity through inconsistent policies, the crisis like pandemic deployment bans, or politicized narratives. And to end this reaction, I think it really raised an important insight that the populism may not only shape the state policy towards the migrants, but also it affects how migrants perceive their own place in the nation, even when they are physically outside the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bernardo. Yes. Yes, any other feedback, question? All right. So with this, I'm going to thank wholeheartedly Dr. John Encinas-Franco for this very insightful and also engaging talk, which is a timely one that you exposed, and actually that you specifically that you actually focused on a very, very important topic, which is also, you know, the Filipino nurses under the Duterte, and which offered us again like a compelling and grounded case that highlighted the implications of broader political dynamics. So thank you again. Thank you for the audience. And again, if you have any pitches you would like to share, please do send it to us this month so that we can program it for the other months. Any researcher, doctoral, or anyone who you know who is interested in the gender issues, it will be great to share it through our committee under the umbrella of the International Political Science Association. So thank you again, and we hope to see you in our next webinars and for another timely topic. Thank you again, and see you soon. Stay tuned.
Thank you. Thank you, Yasmin. Thank you,
Bye.
Swana. And thank you for the coming mga audience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Take care. Have a good night from Manila. Bye-bye.
Have a great afternoon from Morocco. Take care.